Oh my God, it worked! Oh, sorry.
We're here. Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome to episode 26 of the Layover. Tonight, Scotty's bigger than ever. Lindsay's Chicago. And I got up really early.
One life for the revolution. Rise up and unite. Woo! Rise up.
Good Lord, that is stressful.
That's stressful, isn't it?
It's the most stressful thing I do all week, Scotty.
I tell you what, when Lindsay's not here, that is so stressful because normally she goes to us, she goes, right, 10 seconds, guys, 5 seconds, ready to go. And now it was just like, no, do it. Oh, it's what? Yeah. Oh my God, we're on. Oh, never mind.
You distracted me.
I did. Cheers.
Why bigger than ever, Scotty?
Oh, bigger than ever. We all know what visited the UK this week, didn't we? The numero uno. Look at that. Yeah, we've had number 3 engines failed, Captain. On which side? Yeah, never mind, eh? The Maria, or NATO report named the Cossack, the AN-225, visited Bryce, didn't it? To drop off some Puma helicopters that it had picked up.
Yeah.
An amazing airplane, Mark. How heavy do you reckon it can get up to?
So I've only ever seen it once, and that was from the air on departure from Moscow when it was living in whichever airport that was, where it was on the ground for a long while. I don't know. It's got to be much heavier than a jumbo, and that's 500 tons. So 600. I don't know. Go on.
So 640 tons or 705 short tons, which is a measurement I'd never heard of. Short tons. I don't know. Maybe it's a Russian thing. There was only one ever made. Yes. They started to build the second one, but they only ever built one. And what was it? Do you know what it was built for? Any idea why they built this enormous thing?
It was built to carry the Boughton, which was the Russian space shuttle thing, which, by the way, could take off from a runway. Well, the test airplane took off from a runway itself.
It was. Unlike the shuttle, it didn't need a jumbo to launch off the top. Yeah, but this thing could carry the boosters in the inside and the Boughton on the top. It's just horrendous. Only one ever made, as I said. The heaviest transporter, the total weight that it's ever carried, is 247 tons of cargo in one go. 545,000 pounds. That's just astonishing.
And Bryce Norton's fence didn't do very well out of it, I noticed.
No, it didn't. But hey, that we'll move on. It is a secure military establishment. Yeah.
Amazing airplane. If that screen grab is actually from a YouTube video that I watched, and it is pretty entertaining. It looks very complicated to get the thing going. Very complicated indeed. But there we go. Anyway.
Well, she isn't here. She's gone. She's Chicago.
Yeah.
She's off to Chicago. Yeah, so congratulations to Lindsay on passing her A350 course final check. Congratulations. British Airways' newest A350 pilot. But Mark, I have been stalking your missus, and if anyone wants to follow her progress, here she is. I caught her just about an hour ago, just as she was going off, probably about 15, 20 west there. So I reckon she's probably at the middle of the ocean by now. On the BA297 on the way to Chicago in the newest of British Airways A350-1000 fleet. And it has that new smell still, which is lovely to get into an airplane, and it has that new smell.
Any old airplane would do. really for me at the moment. So short of flying, but hopefully there's light at the end of the tunnel. What else are we doing this week?
Oh, I found a unicorn.
Oh, go on.
An absolute unicorn in the aviation industry. I found a fully funded cadet program. Now, anyone who understands this industry will know that lots of pilots, particularly through our work with Pilots Together, will know that have to pay hundreds of thousands of pounds to get their ATPLA. But Bristow is offering a fully sponsored helicopter pilot cadet program. It doesn't say how many there are, but they're making a huge thing out of this, and they'll pay for everything apart from your accommodation. So I think if you are thinking about aspiring to be a commercial pilot of any type, and I'm not a big fan of helicopters, but at the moment, this is probably the best deal you're ever going to see for a very long time, because I haven't seen fully funded programs for a very long time, and I don't think they'll be coming back anytime soon either. Thoughts on that one?
It'll be interesting to talk to them, see whether they're doing it from a sort of social aspect or whether they genuinely think that the pipeline, isn't providing them with the people they want, or whatever it happens to be. But I don't know. I don't. Very, very, very interesting and fantastic that they're doing it. So well done, Bristows. Luckily, I organised the show tonight, Scotty. So luckily,
I know.
No helicopters, no boats, nothing you don't like.
Yeah, I've seen the trailer. I've seen the trailer, and it's all helicopters, all boats. Yeah, so I was kind of hoping it would be next week, and I'd be away. In fact, a lot of us are away next week, so there will be no show next week. Spoiler, Mark was going to tell you later, but all of us are actually working, so we're going to have to do something else. There will be a show, but it won't be live. Very interesting, though, just to go back to the short ton thing. A short ton is £2,000, a US measure, as opposed to a UK ton of £2,240, or a long ton.
I still don't understand pounds.
No, neither do I.
They don't go into my brain. I had to get my head. I was listening to some stuff on train, and I had to get my head around what a chain was. John will know.
Oh, really?
Not our John, but John Thompson will know what a chain is.
John Thompson, a chain.
So, you've been flying.
I have been flying.
How was
it? But you've been trolling the internet, haven't you?
Oh well, I have been. Yeah, I have been having a little scoot round. There's some cool stuff on here. If you're bored with the look of your phone or your PC, you've been staring at your computer too long, Boeing have some really awesome wallpaper. I know it sounds ridiculous, but brightening up your PC and everything is really cool. It's all free. Just download it, stick it on your phone. There we go. Those backgrounds are really quite cool. They've had a proper think about them. You shouldn't conflict with too many of your apps and so on.
I've even got one on my watch now.
Have you?
Yeah, I've got one on the watch. Yeah, sure. Sorry.
Anyway, so well done, Boeing. Thank you very much for the freebies. Yeah, go on. So flying, I've been flying. I did a tiny bit of flying. You've done a bit more flying. Where did you go?
Yeah, so I you know what? I've had a couple of weeks of flying. Some of it for fun, some of it doing training as well. But I went down to Perranporth, somewhere I'd never been before. Been to Newquay or St Morgan quite a bit back in the Air Force days, but never been to Perranporth. Took the Arrow down to Perranporth, which was really nice, on a beautiful day this week, on a mini layover. And I was down there and almost killed myself walking to the cafe, but that's an entirely different story. Some absolutely stunning views. Really was. Yeah, the cafe that we had lunch at is in the middle of that bay there, and we had to walk over the hill, and hills and me don't mix.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Understood.
Yeah, it was good fun. It was really, really nice to get in the Arrow. Haven't been in the Arrow for a very long time. really enjoying getting back to GA flying, actually, Mark. It's just amazing, particularly as we haven't got anything else to do really at the moment, and the weather has been fantastic for it. But you've been flying as well. I saw that you were up early.
I got up really early. 2:45 was my wake-up time. So Lasham Gliding Club organised. They try and do it every year, but obviously, last year was out, and so on. They try and organise a sort of dawn till dusk, longest day flying. It got weathered out at the weekend, and it was all set up for Wednesday. So Jordan Bridge, who's the deputy CFI, organised it all. That's him in the glider waiting to go off there. It was brilliantly organised, a lot of fun. It was very, very, very early indeed. We've got a little video. Do you want me to pop that up, or
I can do it if you want.
Go on.
Yeah,
Pop it up.
Glider video. Here we go. This is quite cool, isn't it?
It looks terribly dark. I can assure you, it wasn't quite that dark.
Oh, upside down.
Right, that's enough of that.
Yeah, I don't like going upside down.
So Jordan was the first up the winch, but it was absolutely brilliant. I got just a quick flip round, but it was lovely, and they flew all day actually with suitably spaced gaps in between. So because obviously getting up at 2 o'clock in the morning, unlikely to be able to survive a full day of flying, but it was brilliant, absolutely brilliant, lovely. Back in time for breakfast, and the cafe was roaring into life at 7 a.m, which was great. I know we're going to play his video in a minute, but our guest tonight, are we going to move on to the guest, Scotty? Should we do that?
Yeah, let's do it. I can't think of anything else to talk about, and I really want to get the boats and the helicopters thing out the way as quickly as possible.
I know it's got the news focus has been elsewhere this week. Should we?
It has
been more about cameras and hands.
I have actually got a camera in this room that faces the door, but I can assure you that there will be no videos of that nature of me against the door.
Thank you for the warning. So our guest tonight, he's enjoyed a career that's taken him from the heli deck to the boardroom. He is actually the son of a Fleet Air Arm pilot, but his dad was also an expat businessman. And I think that expat nature meant he was comfortable with a bit of adventure. So he ran away to sea to fly helicopters. And his Cold War training swapped into a very hot war down in the Falklands. He was decorated for his gallantry, returned to the UK as an instructor, flew for the US Navy, would you believe? So we're going to hear a little bit about that. And then eventually left the military and has had a successful career in aerospace and defence since. But Scotty, if you run John's trailer, we'll welcome him after that. How about that?
Here's John's trailer.
The day started pretty much as normal, with a brief before dawn to go down to Fitzroy to unload Galahad and Sir Tristram. We were flying low level, 30 feet, 90 knots with an undersung load, and all of a sudden fighter jets went past us. I heard the noise and got into a hide, and we immediately saw the smoke coming up from the ship. On arrival into the bay, it was very clear that Galahad had been attacked. She was on fire. Sir Tristram, there was no sign of any fire at that stage. We could also see survivors had managed to get into the life rafts and were being looked after by a couple of aircraft that had just arrived about the same time. So we decided that as we could see able-bodied and seriously injured people on the front of the ship, on the forecastle, we decided to move immediately there and start to lift them off as best we could. At this stage, the fire had started to engulf really the ship quite significantly. There were large explosions. My crewman, Roy Eggleston, looking out the back door, was in essence looking into an inferno. And at times, explosions blasted ammunition up into the sky and landed around us in the water. But we managed, with the aircraft coming in one after the other, to lift all the survivors off, get them to the nearest point of land, and then later on they were moved on to the hospital position and then onto the hospital ship later in the day. June the 8th, 1982 was a tough day, and a tough day for many people that were involved, but it was part of a much wider campaign where so many things happened and so many events occurred that never got the recognition. And whilst we were delighted to have played a minor part in the saving of life, we really had to put that into perspective as we went into the battle that was to come, on the amount of people that lost their lives in the fighting that was involved. So we all look back on that as an achievement and something to look back positively in what was a tough time for everybody involved.
Amazing video, and really sort of tough times. So I'm going to bring John in now. John, welcome to the Layover.
Welcome. Evening, Mark, and Scottie.
Hey, how are you? Can I just start off by saying, can we extend our thanks to the Royal Navy for allowing us to use that film? An amazing short piece, John, and I think it just sets this evening off nicely. If you pass on our thanks to them for allowing us to use that.
Yeah, particularly the commanding officer of 825, who was the one who had the idea and commissioned it.
Yeah, wonderful. Really good, really good. Well, John, we're going to start with your wedding day. 39 years ago, around about May, 39 years ago, I think you said May Day. Is that right?
Yep.
And you were marrying your fiancée, Sally. For reasons that will become apparent, take us back to that moment.
Well, I had finished my first frontline tour and went off on the instructor's course at Central Flying School to become a QHI. Sally was an air traffic controller in the Air Force, and we met while we were at RAF Shawbury. And we had, I'd been assigned to the Seeking Training and Conversion Unit, which did both type conversions and operational training. The war had started in the sense of the majority of the main force had gone south. So we were expecting to continue to produce, young people through the pipeline and do whatever was required back in the UK. Our wedding was planned for May Day, so that didn't change. We had to bin any idea of a honeymoon for obvious reasons. And we were a fantastic day. As you see for the photograph, I had a lot of the squadron that were there. And 9 o'clock at night, the senior pilots got a phone call saying, in essence, sir, the duty officer here, you've all been recalled to form a squadron to go down south. Now, his response was probably not exactly what I should repeat here, but in essence, I don't believe you. I've been to lots of naval weddings, and you can put the phone down. And it took 3 calls for our poor duty student to actually get through to the senior pilot to say, no, this actually is true. So the squadron went back on the Sunday, and on the Monday morning formed 825 Naval Air Squadron, a squadron that had been formed in the past. It was very instrumental in the Bismarck. So it had a squadron with great history. And we, in essence, split the training squadron into roughly half. 10 aircraft would go south, and the remainder would remain back in the UK to continue training.
Wow. And so we, I mean, obviously Sally wasn't expecting a honeymoon at all, but definitely not a honeymoon in the Falklands. No. So you had absolutely no inkling that was the plan.
No, not at all. I mean, we literally, we had, in those days, we would have had more than 20 aircraft on that combined training unit. So, and at least 2 of our aircraft had gone on to the carrier as extra numbers for 2 of the frontline squadrons. So no, we just assumed that we would continue to train. But it did mean on Monday morning, we had an incredible task, more so all the maintainers, to actually create a flyaway pack for 2 different ships and get aircraft ready to depart south. So it was a fairly major evolution.
And with that, what was the squadron designed to do then at that point?
we didn't really know what the tasking would be. I think it was our view was we were told, get ready to bring 10 more Sea Kings south. One of the briefs that we got was that you'll go, and so you'll arrive as everybody else is leaving, and so you'll be the helicopter squadron supporting the garrison. And that was the sort of initial info that we got. But to be fair, I mean, we weren't really trying to find anything else other than get ready, get embarked, get south, get trained up, find the equipment that we required, because again, we weren't equipped as a training squadron to deploy, and get on with it. So we certainly sailed with a total unknown. We didn't really know what was coming.
Wow. And could you sort of, I guess, what do you then train for then? So you just fly and say, okay, let's try a bit of this and a bit of that, or what? I guess there are some standards that you would train for.
Yeah, well, first of all, we were in the instructors for obviously all of the secondary roles, so load lifting, troop lifting, deck landings. So all of that would have been part of our skill set as instructors. And we were, of the 10 first pilots, 9 were QHIs, qualified helicopter instructors. We borrowed a staff pilot from 819 Squadron up in Scotland to make up the numbers. So, it was really getting us current. That was probably more to the point. But the part that I haven't covered so far is we were going to embark on a ship that was, at that stage, on the 3rd of May, a container ship. And it was carrying containers from Amsterdam on the way to New York. And talking to the captain, when we embarked, he was listening to Radio 4 and was heard that his vessel was another one to be taken up from trade. And that was before he actually got a telegram from the Cunard line that owned the vessel to pull in, drop his containers, and then proceed on to Plymouth, where he was then to prepare to embark both stores and also aircraft. So we didn't know that in the first few days. We really had no inkling. So our maintainers had to convert the aircraft. So they were mainly configured for ASW, so anti-submarine warfare. So all of the anti-submarine warfare equipment came out of the airframe. So from a pilot's point of view, a great weight saving. We put in new freight floor. Troop seats were up to added to give a capacity for about 18 troop seats. And there was a PI FM radio, so in other words, Army communications installed with a whip aerial on the port side. And all of that was done within about 6 or 7 days. It was quite incredible, the amount of effort that was went into it. And that comms had to be integrated into the aircraft system, obviously.
And Scottie's going to ask you about this business of taking up from trade, which is a great phrase. Yeah. But
I've read Roland White's book, Harrier 809, and I think anybody who's read that book will have a sense of the sort of the preparations that went into the Falklands War, and projecting a force 8,000 miles away from home was, as he's kind of alluded to there, no small task. Now, I've got a picture here, which it speaks 1,000 words, but this is a container vessel that's been turned into effectively a helicopter assault ship, John.
Yeah, and
it's bonkers.
And speaking to the captain, he was, I think by the time we had finished embarking, he'd finished 3 rolls of film, so he just couldn't believe what was going on. But he told this lovely story that once they pulled in, there was somebody from the ministry who came on board with plans that had obviously been in a drawer somewhere, pre-planned. This was not an accident. This was all part of some kind of long-term planning. And the man had these plans. Next to him was a guy with some chalk, and he was told to either on the guardrails on the outside of the vessel, either put cut on them or remain. And then behind him was a guy with an acetylene torch that basically everything that said cut, you cut, and you pushed it over the side into a barge. And that in essence cleared that area that you could see port and starboard for the deck area. There was another spot aft, which would take one aircraft folded and up tight against the superstructure, and you could still use the aft spot for deck landing practice. And we had, I think it was something like 21 or more helicopters on board. So it was 8 of our Sea Kings, sorry, and the rest were Wessex 5s that had been loaded on, and all of that was loaded in a day, flown in from Calderos in our case, the Wessex 5s from Yeovilton, and that captain had to go through this. I'm a container ship, and by the end of the day, I'm a helicopter carrier. Quite incredible.
It is. I mean, I find it just astonishing that there's some bloke in Whitehall somewhere who's got all these plans away in some sort of container, and somebody says, contingency 2, 3, 4, 5. Can you blow the dust off and bring it to Portsmouth? We're gonna build a boat, and it's just bonkers to think that.
And then this wasn't the only one. I mean, the Atlantic Conveyor, it's a vessel that sadly sunk, our sister ship, had already departed. So they'd already been through the same process. That photograph is the forward spot on the QE2. We had 2 aircraft embarked on her. Very cleverly, they put the landing platform on top of the swimming pools, on the basis that if you take all the weight of the water out of the pool, that you could then sustain the weight of a Sea King. So, which in that guy's maximal up weight would be about 21,000 pounds. And QE2 had 2 spots aft, 1 spot forward.
Wow!
I just find it astonishing.
An incredible faith from the captain. There's a bloke going blazing through bits of the ship, pushing it over the, and then the next thing they say is, "Off you go to sea." Now we've cut lots of bits of your ship away.
Yeah, and what you never see, and it was never really covered, was all the crew were given the option by the ship owners of, you can pay off. There's no disgrace if you want to leave. Absolutely no problem at all. Nobody paid off. Nobody left the vessel. They all went as a civilian crew. They all came south with running the ship. Inside the vessel itself was enough food for 6,000 men for 6 months, which was all on pallets in the car deck. There was earth-moving vehicles. There were runway making material, these rolls of, in essence, corrugated runway that was later deployed into San Carlos water for the Harriers. There was a Rapier battery. There were numerous other vehicles and fuel tankage, and there was an entire fuel farm. So they drove tankers into the various car decks and parked them up, chained them down, connected them with pipe, and then there was a little petrol-driven pump on the deck, which sucked up the fuel to refuel. And we never had a problem with fuel. They couldn't top up the aviation fuel that was on board, but we never had an issue all the way down there.
I just think it's very, for those of you who will remember Heath Robinson and some of the cartoons of the stuff he invented, it just sounds so Heath Robinson. But John, I'm conscious that these are civilian vessels. These are not military vessels. You've cut a load of stuff off of them to make them accessible to helicopters, but you've not really put any defense or weaponry of any great, meaningful sort of type on these vessels. Did you feel vulnerable at all?
At that stage, to be honest, all I can remember is being, everybody was totally engaged with their role and what they were doing, because it was such a learning curve. As you can imagine, you dump it's probably about 60 odd people onto Causeway. I think we had 30 on an RFA as well that went down separately as a deep maintenance team, and the rest on QE2. There wasn't really a time to think about that until a little bit later. There was no anti-aircraft equipment on board at all, so there were no weapons mounted on bridge wings at that stage or anything like that. We had a couple of Royal Marine instructors that were going to take us through our personal weapons drills, because obviously everybody had to be issued with weapons. That, as an aside, was one job I had. So you get the call, somebody says, "Oh, look, can you just get weapons for 110 people? So we'll need GPMGs for the aircraft, we'll need SMGs for the crewmen, sidearms, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we just need to get them here quickly. And you can imagine as a sort of a lieutenant thinking, where on earth do I start? But we had them ordered in an afternoon and delivered to Cornwall by the middle of the next day from somewhere up north.
Wow.
Quite incredible.
So everybody get a truck, fill it full of guns, and drive south.
But everybody you spoke to, it was, what do you want? How quickly can we get it to you? There was never, ever any attitude of, I don't know, and that was probably one of the lasting experiences of the whole episode, the can-do attitude of every single person that you met in whatever role they were in. So did we feel vulnerable? Yes, the plan, I think, was the ship to go as fast as it could go, because obviously the main concern would be a submarine threat. And we pulled into Ivory Coast to refuel the vessel on the way down. That was very funny. They sent a pilot and 2 intelligence officers on board. It was so obvious because they were trying to quiz us, and we all made out to be deck officers in the Cunard line, and we had no idea what we were carrying. It was just cargo. So that was pretty entertaining at the time.
But subterfuge.
It was just when we started to get towards the sort of the danger areas, if you like, and we had designated sea lanes that we were told to take. We subsequently found that there was UK nuclear submarines clearing that water. And the only time that we did actually feel slightly vulnerable was we decided that we would basically do stand 2 drills every day on the ship. And then one day that we said, okay, that's it. If it happens again, it's for real. And the very next morning at about 5 o'clock in the morning, the alarm went off, and one of our observers who was been running a watch with the civilian crew on the bridge had noticed on the radar, the civilian radar, what's called a riser in anti-submarine warfare. In other words, a periscope. And he just saw it, appear and gone, appear and gone. So he knew exactly what it was. We sent off a flash signal. The ship sent off a flash signal to the UK and got basically an answer back. Don't worry about it. So we assume it was one of ours.
Yeah, don't worry about it. We were just making sure you were still there.
Keeping tabs on you.
Yeah.
And so you get to within about 250 miles of the Falklands, and that's as far as they're going to take you. Off you go, John, and all your helicopters, etc.
Again, we didn't know. So all the way down, I think it was three days of settling everybody. The aircrew, we all volunteered to do aircraft covers. Now, I don't know if you've ever done aircraft covers on, well, probably not a helicopter in your case, Scotty, but you get this massive bag and you haven't got a clue. So I think that provided the entertainment for the maintainers for at least a day and a half, watching the aircrew trying to put covers around all the airframes. But within 3 days, we were doing deck landing practice day and night. We were working up the flight deck because, of course, there's never been anybody flying off it. So you had to get the flight deck controller worked up. We had to get fire crews worked up in case there was an incident on board. So by the time we got down there, we were pretty well prepared, but we had no idea what was going to happen. So we got a flash signal that said, and then for those not military, if you get a flash signal, it's a big deal. I mean, it's as urgent as it can be. I'd never seen one before, to be honest. And it basically said, send 3 aircraft ashore from 250 miles out into San Carlos water, which is where the landings had taken place. And timing wise, this was about I think we went ashore the day, the morning of the surrender at Goose Green. So that first battle had taken place. From a pilot's perspective, it was a bit sort of really, because they said, what you need to do is head off here, 5 maintainers in the back. I had one of our senior course as in the left-hand seat. We took the senior course as extra eyes and ears, and the crewman in the back. And we were told the ship would be a position X. Anybody who has flown in the Navy knows that the ships are never where they say they're going to be. I think it's a game they play with aviators. And what you should do is you get to 25 miles and you do a 720-degree turn to the right. And it's not above 200 feet, so you go in at 200 feet. They'll recognize you as friend, and you proceed in and land on, refuel. So by the time you get to the beach, you've got a reasonable fuel level. Well, we did that. We got to 30 miles from Point X-ray and did our 720-degree turn, and there wasn't a sausage in sight, not a thing. So we did another 5 miles or 10 miles, I can't remember what it was. We did another 720-degree turn to the right, and there was nothing at all. So eventually I thought, well, we're going to have to climb. So we climbed up, nothing at all visually, nothing. And I got my crewman to put on just a couple of flashes of the radar, because there's no comms. We were all in comm silence and not using the radar, and he couldn't see a vessel for 60 miles. So it was a little bit of a tricky moment. So
can I ask, John, what is the sort of the reasonable range of a Sea King? I mean, you're already out at 250 away from there, and you're looking at 60, and there's still no. I mean, are you getting worried at this point? You're going to have to land on.
We were thinking about. We had certainly calculated how much was required to get into what was known as Blue Beach 2, which is where we were heading, which is in the anchorage. But we didn't want to get there empty, because we assumed that there would be, we would need a lot of reserves, and we might be tasked straight away. So one concern, I think the theoretical range of a Sea King was about 640 miles. The normal endurance would be, let's say, maximum 3.5, 4 hours with some payload. In other words, people and their kit in the back. So we weren't totally worried about it, but it was getting a little bit of a concern, because again, we couldn't climb, because that's an absolute no-no. Helicopters are limited to 200 feet fixed wing above. So what we did was we actually climbed up again once, clicked through the UHF box, literally channel by channel, and eventually popped a fighter controller talking for Britain, and so we put the DF on, got a bearing, and headed down that bearing, and about 60 or 70 miles later, we found an aircraft carrier. Came alongside, in the helicopter world, you come alongside a ship, again, MCOM silence. If you give a drinking sign, it's I need fuel. They landed us on. Lots of heads popped up, because it was clearly everybody recognized the number of the airframe was a training squadron. So there was an element of, because they didn't know we were coming. Absolutely no idea at all. Refueled, and then off we went. And then we arrived at the heads entry into the Sandcars water in a massive snowstorm. So it was a 4-hour flight of several phases, let's put it that way. And we air taxied through the snowstorm, through the entrance, with my chief of crewman, who's in the back, using the radar just to help us get through the heads at low level, at sort of 30, 40 knots in the snow.
So basically, you walked the helicopter through a gap in the planet blind.
Yeah, but then, as we'll probably get onto, then that's what everybody did, because what do you do? You're not going to climb and finding the nav aids, and you had a job to do. So we managed, we got through it, landed on where we were told to be, but we were outside the protective line of 4-2 Commando, so that was a slightly bad moment. The other two arrived over about the next 45 minutes. And then we overnighted there, and then we were geared up the following morning to go straight onto tasking.
And had it become more obvious what you were there to do? So this is you're carrying bits and pieces there. Is that home? Is that home, or is that 4-2 Commando's home?
No, that was our home on the right. That's my little flight. We were based up in the hills. So the way that operators in this sort of role operators, you put the aircraft remotely into little eagle bases, so in dips in the terrain. So if there was an air attack, you're not going to be able to take out a whole series of aircraft with one run. So that's my team during the day while we're off flying. There was a total of 8 of us, and the photograph on the left is very much what we did. That's taking ammunition to 105 guns that were on the other side of Mount Kent. But no, at this stage, we're just told to go and respond to tasking. So we were just ready to, do whatever was required.
And you sort of become very army all of a sudden. It's not very senior service. You seem to suddenly become very Green Army.
I looked at this picture here and I think, oh my goodness, they are actually down and dirty here. And the Air Force ran their entire campaign from Waddington in Lincolnshire. So I'm going to stick with the Air Force and launching the V bombers as opposed to this. But goodness, I do not envy you with this.
Well, I think you have to remember that the Navy has an entire commando support squadrons that is their role. So this is their bread and butter. They were already there. They were in the first wave. We were the reserves that ended up being thrown onto the pitch, for want of a better expression, not knowing that was going to happen. So our learning curve was steep. There's no doubt about that. But I guess the argument was, if you're going to send instructors down, your probability is they're going to be an asset more than a liability. It was very interesting that our first 2 days, 1.5 days of tasking was moving POWs. So I'm sure, there was an element of, well, they just arrived, not quite sure how operational they're going to be. Just get them to move people. So I spent the whole of the first day, 4 or 5 hours of flying from Goose Green back up to the landing craft where the prisoners of war from Goose Green were taken. And that's all we did. And I think as we got trusted more by the taskers, then our role became, more complex.
So it seems like resourcefulness seemed to be the watchword. When we spoke before, you said fuel and don't fly very high. So Scottie, how high do you reckon? What was their sort of maximum operational altitude?
As helicopters, I reckon we're talking not above 50.
Yeah, spot on. So not above 50 feet with an underslung load. Normal operating height, 30 feet. Obviously, the challenge was, where do you find fuel? So if you take a day, we'd be out in our little Eagle base there. The very young maintainers that I had would be up, an hour or so before dawn. They couldn't really use lights. So they're trying to inspect an aircraft that was sitting in peat bog and hopefully not sinking too much into the peat bog, prepping the airplane as best they could. And just before first light, or at first light, we would fly over to a tasking tent and literally pick up a tasking note, or sometimes it will be sent out over radio, something that's known as a HelQuest, and you could get anything. So there were occasionally mistakes where we would be sent to pick 2 people up, and a small Gazelle helicopter from the Army would have been sent to pick up 18. But that wasn't the norm. It was better than that. And we embedded our observers, which is the tacticians in the Navy rather than navigator in the Air Force. Our observers were embedded in the tasking cell. So they were a fantastic asset because obviously they understood exactly what our aircraft could do. And a lot of the tasking was coming out via them. But yeah, fuel and food, that was the task for the day. Where do you find your fuel? Ships would take you, if you could, outside of air attacks, just come alongside a ship that was fuel capable, and you just land on, take fuel, off you go.
John, you've just talked about air attacks there. Now, this is a war zone. We've been quite matter of fact about it up till now. We've been talking about Sea Kings and finding ships, and it's all been quite hilarious. But in reality, this is a war zone. There's a war going on here, and you're in a helicopter, which back in those days was probably not the best equipped for this kind of war. There were Predators around. What were the Predators? Was it Pucara? Was there A4s? I mean, both. Did you come across any of those? Were you
in the actual anchorage? Then predominantly that was what was known as Bomb Alley at the time. So that was the A4s and the Mirages coming in to try and attack the ships, and we would in essence just scatter. So as soon as remembering that, as I said before, it was nearly all radio silence. The one exception to that would be someone would come up and say air raid warning red, and scatter. So all the helicopters would just disappear off into the foothills and get on the ground in a hollow and just wait. And then we always figured that the A4 or the Mirages are coming in at 450 knots. They're not going to have the time or focus to see a helicopter at all. More of our concern was once we were out of that area was the Pucaras, which some of them had been taken out already by the Special Air Squadron, so that risk had reduced. But there were some based at Stanley, and we never saw any try to attack any of our squadron at all. And in fact, one of the big mysteries is why they didn't come out and try and take us on. But we certainly were on regular routes where maybe 10 helicopters were flying the route, and I didn't see another helicopter either going the same way or the other way, because everybody's down in the contours. So you really needed to not be seen rather than, because as you said, there was no defensive aid suite or anything like that at all. You just be, fast and low and just don't be seen.
So the most effective countermeasure was hide, in more ways than one. Were there any? I mean, I'm not a big helicopter fan, John, but I can, it is a workhorse, the helicopter, particularly for the army. And what particular tasks do you think during this period were more challenging than others? Was it, underslung lows, moving the people, and the weather, the terrain? What was the biggest challenge for you? Bearing in mind you've got a student still, really, in the other seat. I mean, so that's sapping your capacity as well, because they're not 100% on the game, and you as an instructor are kind of trying to instruct at the same time. I don't know if that's fair or not, but I mean, it's quite challenging. How difficult was it for you?
I think for everybody, it was really the same in the sense the weather is a massive challenge, because at that time of year, you can see every season in a day. It freezes overnight. There's a thawing. Down comes the rain, it then snows in the early evening, freezes overnight. So it was dealing with the weather was actually really quite difficult. And there were only, if I look back in my logbook, there were only 1 or 2 days where we didn't fly, or very, very little, because it was just on the deck. You couldn't do that. But if you took the mountain range that was just to the southeast of us, we had to get over that to get to Goose Green and on to Fitzroy, Bluff Cove and the southern flank, and the same the other way around to the north. So you would just fly up to the bottom of the cloud base that was at that range, slow right down, fast walking pace, air taxi up through the cloud, over the high ground on the other side, air taxi down the other side till you popped out, and then accelerate and descend back down to low level. So, you dealt with the weather as best you could without jeopardizing obviously your own crew's safety, but equally, you've had people out in all weathers needing ammunition, needing resupply, and there was just a very, very, very keen focus on getting the job done. But there were a number of issues for everybody, and I imagine that the people on the ground were going through the same thing. With the weather was a real hindrance, and then you add that on to the fact that you obviously had to fuel, so you had usable payload. So there was no point in putting 5,000 pounds of fuel on board because you couldn't lift anything. So you had to try and balance the fuel load so that you could lift up to the maximum 6,000 pounds on the hook. Or 18 plus people in the back. And I don't think any of the particular flying was any more challenging the other until you get towards the end of the day, where we weren't night vision capable. There was a very, very small number of people that were at that time. And some of the tasking went on into the evening. So And I think we certainly flew all of the Bergens for one of the commando brigades onto the side of a mountain in the dark to 6 right-angled torches for about an hour. And
wow,
that was probably, the one where you just thought, but and then obviously as the main battle then ensued on the way to Stanley, things moved very quickly from an aviation point of view. So, you at one stage be told, right, don't go past this point, and then the next tasking is about 4 miles beyond that point.
Yeah.
So, you ended up going into places where you probably shouldn't have been. But again, you needed to push people forward, or we needed to bring casualties back out. And it's in that role that you saw the Army Air Corps with the Gazelles and Scouts that did absolutely miraculous things right up to the front line to pull out the seriously wounded, where we didn't get tasked to do that with the bigger aircraft. So I don't remember there being any one particular thing. I think there's a whole raft of bits to the day. And then the hours. I mean, I've got a 9 hours 45 in my logbook for one day, and there wasn't 9 hours of daylight. So actually, and I think I did something like 160 hours in 28 days, including 140 deck landings and about 2 hours of nighttime. But again, tribute to the airplane, because the airframes kept going, and we really had very few issues. We did have one or two, but when you consider that amount of level of flying in those conditions, it was remarkable. A, the airframe themselves, and B, the people that are trying to maintain them in most appalling conditions.
Yeah, 9 hours and 45 minutes below 50 feet.
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like a lot when you're doing it in an airliner at 35,000 feet, but actually I know, I struggled to do a couple of hours in a Herc at low level just because of the concentration required, but 9 hours is just staggering. You must have been exhausted.
I slept well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
John, if I may, let's move on to the Sir Galahad. So the Galahad was an an RFA ship, Royal Fleet Auxiliary ship, and the plan was to sort of deliver troops. It was struck by I think Mark 82 5-pound bombs, and there's this is a fairly famous picture, I think, that made the front pages, etc. I think that's the one that was on the paper. That's you there, is it?
Yes. We later identified that was. We didn't really know that the ships had gone forward. Again, if you go back into the kind of time we're talking about from a comms point of view, we had no comms with the outside world. We were just given a tasking, so off you'd go. So we had no idea that where those ships were. I mean, it's obviously well documented now why they were there and who was on board. We were sent down to a tasking just before dawn to go and offload those individuals, which didn't happen for, again, whatever reason. And so we went back to Goose Green and picked up an underslung load, which is a comms vehicle. And we were heading over what is a fairly flat marshy area on the way back down to San Carlos and Bluff Cove, and that area, where the ship is, it was irrelevant. And the 4A4s literally went past the window, and I didn't see them, I heard them, which is a bit bizarre because obviously the helicopter's quite noisy. So we put down the underslung load, picked it up later so we didn't get lost completely, and went into a hide, and then we saw the smoke. So that was the first thing that we knew about it. And I called on the radio a contact report, and then headed in that direction, to find out what was going on. But the whys and the wherefores of who was there and why they were there, it wasn't something that we were involved in. We were just tasked to go off and offload.
So put us in the cockpit. If we pop up this is a picture that no one's ever seen, but this is sort of your personal archive, and you're approaching the ship here. What were you thinking? What was going through your crew's minds? What were you talking about? What was the plan next?
Jeff Boyce was my co-pilot of the day. He took this before really we understood what was going on. So as we came in, that's in essence what we saw as we came into the bay. I could see people had obviously got into life rafts. There was one of the landing craft on the right-hand side as you look at it there that were taking survivors off. So we just flew straight down towards the ship. And at that point, we saw able-bodied and severely injured personnel on the front of the ship. So we decided that was the priority. So we immediately came up onto the bows to start to lift up survivors. But that was particularly difficult because they weren't prepared. In the search and rescue world, you've got specialized harnesses and stretchers. They just didn't exist. So the first thing we tried to do was actually get the aircraft door almost down to the level of the deck. And I just vividly remember the captain of the ship actually coming into my eye line, giving me a sort of, how far we were off the back. And my crewman, Roy Eggleston, at this stage was obviously looking into an inferno. The hold of the vessel was completely alight. It was just an absolute inferno. The fire had already started to creep up into the bridge area. We'll know from pilots, perspective, we always want to do something into wind, and it's no different in a helicopter. To gain the maximum tail rotor authority, you want to have the nose and the airframe pointing into wind. Now, as you can see from that picture, it's quite a strong wind from the head of the ship. So, which meant we had to be about 25, 30 degrees off fore and aft, which made actually visibility quite difficult. So everything was in my sort of 4 or 5 o'clock from a deck point of view. And then it was up to the individuals on the deck, incredibly brave, because they're closest to the fire at the end of the day. I mean, okay, we're hovering next to it, but they prioritized who they wanted to get up into the aircraft. And then I asked Jeff to go back to help Roy Eggleston, and then said to them, look, as soon as we get somebody on board that you think just has to go, to the nearest point of land, just say go, and we'll depart to the nearest point of land. Because by that stage, I was aware that at least another one of our aircraft had appeared and was behind us in the hover. I think there's a couple of photographs of them the aircraft in a little bit of a queue. And we just repeated that until eventually, collectively, all of the survivors on the front of the ship were taken off nearest point of land, where the army dealt with them from a first aid point of view.
And I find it amazing that sort of happened quite organically. That presumably you weren't calling those helicopters in; they saw what you were doing, and that was the the second one I think came when in fact the second aircraft was flown by Phil. He actually landed on Tristram because he was low on fuel. Because again, it didn't look like Tristram had been hit, and those fleet auxiliaries had a lot of the deck crew were Chinese, Hong Kong Chinese, and they actually popped out and refueled him. And it wasn't until they got airborne again that they saw the holes in the side of the ship. So the bombs were lodged in the ship, and they had refueled him and set him on his way. So, but yeah, I think people could just see what was happening. It was obvious, and I just called next on the radio, and the next person came in. And this is amazing. It looks like the sort of the same was happening on the other side of the door or the winch, which is some prioritization for the casualties. I know Tom. We saw Tom on Twitter.
As Tom's saying, I mean, it was up to them to prioritize who came up, and that was also a challenge because, again, it's excruciating to lift somebody if you haven't got the right stuff. So it was not, it wasn't great. It really wasn't at all. And our challenge from a pilot's point of view was really that, yes, you had the flames, but occasionally there would be a massive explosion out of that. We would be blown 15, 20 feet to the left, away from the fire. And then you just come back, into position. And at one stage, I looked up and the sky was completely full of specks, and they went into the water around us, which we could only assume were, sort of ordnance of some sort. And it actually almost came down through the rotor disc. And there were mildly sort of light moments. The pyrotechnic lockers, which are on the bridge wings of a ship like that, the fire eventually split the locker, and a distress rocket came at us, hit us in the side of the airplane, which was a bit sort of off-putting. And I can remember closing my window, which is made of the flimsiest plastic that you've ever seen in your life. So
I think I have the window closed. Marvelous. Yes.
Absolutely.
Wow.
So as I say, the people on the deck did an absolutely amazing job in prioritizing, and then I picked up my crew picked up the captain and the last of the able-bodied people who had been, managing that, and we ran out of fuel. So we took a decision that because a couple of aircraft had departed to go and refuel, and we decided that we would run right down to lights on, and knowing that we had dropped fuel for the Army Air Corps the day before. So we ran down to fuel lights on, last people ashore, and then we hopped over to where the Army Air Corps were and scrounged fuel from them, which we then hand pumped out of a barrel into the airframe and replaced it the next day.
Just amazing. I tell you what's coming across for me as an instructor and is at that point, everybody's training, everything everybody's ever been delivered, all of the reasons they've been recruited for, all of the things that make them good humans to be in that environment is being utilized in that moment, isn't it? And there's a lot that can be written down. There's a lot that can't be written down there in that environment.
Yeah, and I think that's really hit the nail on the head in the sense of, we came from a very pedantic training environment, where it's all so standardized, and we were the bastions of standardization, if you like. But equally, we were all experienced enough to know when, or thought we were, more to the point, of when you could stretch the military flying regulation to get the job done, without obviously endangering your crew or people on the ground. And I think that's a judgment call. And we were lucky in many ways. We were mortared a couple of times. We were hit by small arms, but again, you don't know about it at the time because there's so much noise. It's only when you get back and find damage in the airframe. And we only lost one aircraft to our use because as he air taxied a Rapier battery up to the top of a mountain in cloud, put the aircraft on the ground, and it just one wheel sank into the peak, and they had a tip strike on the ground. But the tail of the aircraft was actually used on a Mark IV, so it then became an issue centre for spare.
And so, just the last word on the Galahad, which is very, very appropriately, Queen's Gallantry Medal came your way, and I'm sure others were issued. But extraordinary bit of flying, and as Elaine said, you just talk about it so sort of so kind of matter of factly. I can't find the comment now, but just so matter of factly, and it's just such a powerful point. There's a great comment from John, and also some other comments from Tom about getting the casualties off.
Yeah, I'd just like to add, it's incredibly humbling. Just to echo what Graham said here, armed forces do amazing things for us all. Thank you, and I know you've been recognised formally for this, John, but so many weren't. And it was, a lot of people were exceptionally brave on that day in the helicopter and outside, as we've heard from Tom as well, to get so many people away from that danger in the time that they did.
But I think that's the whole point. We had a TV cameraman from the pool standing on the headland filming the whole thing. So, it created a lot of public interest, but there were so many other things that were going on, both in the preparation and run up to the main battle, during the main battle, and then even afterwards, which, you never heard about because there was just no coverage, no recognition. So, and I was a little uncomfortable with the whole thing afterwards, but, because of that fact. It was almost like there was highlighting certain events because TV picked up on it, and it was a lasting image because the video coverage was there.
Yeah. Before I come on to the close of the end of the war, Tom's actually, who you obviously know, has made another comment which I think is very poignant. Not only did you get them off, but the people who were in the water, you used your downdraft to blow the rafts away from the ship.
Yeah, well, not personally. That was there were 2 or 3 other aircraft. In fact, I think a total of about 6 or 7 were involved in the whole of the operation, coming in and out at various times. So obviously that was the key, because what we didn't know was whether the whole ship would explode. Because as I say, you're looking into this inferno. It was obvious that could happen, and the ship is full of aviation fuel because you use it to refuel on a daily basis, as well as all the ammunition, as well as all the equipment. So, yeah, getting the casualties, away in the lifeboat, away from the ship. The other aircraft did a very good job of.
Amazing,
John. Humbling, absolutely humbling. But the war is drawing to a close now. We're going to move on a little bit. Calm is returning to the Falklands, but your squadron stays on. Why did that? The war's over. I mean, Pucaras have been shot to bits, blown up by the SAS. Why did you stay on?
Well, to be fair, we were late to the party. That's the wrong expression, but we were late to the event. We set off after everybody else. We thought we were going to be there as part of a garrison. And so it was right and proper that the people that had come down first went back on the ships that they had come south with. And that obviously left the role of battlefield clearance to a limited or a much smaller pool of people on the ground as well as aircraft. So we started literally on the day of the surrender, either moving people around, getting them from A to B, moving some casualties around, starting to extract equipment that had been obviously taken into remote spots. There was inevitably the old senior officer who wanted a taxi ride into Stanley, which we weren't very keen on, but there we go. And we were there for another month, I think, roughly, doing exactly that, and clearing battlefield clearance, as well as we were tasked to do some hearts and minds. So go out to the settlements and visit the people, who were there, who had obviously been through all of this really difficult time. Some of them very, very remote. Pebble Island, which is where that Bukhara was. We took that shot, I think, a week after the surrender. And I think what's interesting in that photograph is how efficient the special forces were, because it looks ostensibly a serviceable airframe, but they had put charges onto the wing spars, which of course made the aircraft completely unusable. So I think that that was a lot of what we did after the main sort of ships departed and set off, which gave us also challenges, because our people have been so motivated throughout the whole of the campaign to get things done. And on one occasion we even flew a Sea King from the field single engine to Engadine because we had sucked in some debris. Landed it on single engine, which is not it's not got great single engine performance. And our team on Engadine put new engine in overnight, woke me up at about 4 a.m. to do ground checks, and then a hover check at the end. And by the equivalent of dawn, we were back serviceable again. So, there were just incredible amounts of, can do. Now the war is over, and we had no idea whether we were there for another week, month. No idea. It was actually quite difficult to, work out how were we going to maintain that level of motivation when it was cold, when we were flying, the rest of the team were just sitting around. And that wasn't easy at all. So we had to find other ways of occupying them.
So, talking about other ways of occupying them, I've been in war zones as well, where you might go and visit somebody, you might find the odd thing lying around that you might think, oh, that looked nice in the crew room. I could take that back, and the Americans' prized possessions go missing, never to be seen again, and they appear in a crew room somewhere. But you guys went a little bit further than that, and you just happen to find a helicopter. Tell us the story about this.
To be fair, what happened was the senior pilot of, I think it was 820 Squadron, had a tour in the States where he'd flown the aircraft, and they had flown in, presumably bringing people in from the ship into Stanley, saw that there were, I think, 2 serviceable airframes there. I mean, they weren't in great condition inside the aircraft, but let's not go there. And he flew the helicopter over to Blue Beach, dropped it in our field, and then back he went on the ship when none of us had a chance to talk to him because, you know, we were all flying. So we get back off our day to find this AE-422 sitting in our field. So we thought, well, what we'll do is we'll get our maintenance crew, maintenance team, to take it on as a project. So take it for a couple of days, you know, work it through as a professional engineer, assess whether you feel it's serviceable. Remember, it had actually flown, you know, to there from Stanley. And if you give it the bill of health, you know, thumbs up, we'll fly it. Now, none of us had ever flown the airframe at all.
How hard can it be, eh? How hard can it be?
We found a set of flight reference cards, and one of our observers could speak some Spanish, so he translated them into a basic English pack. We jumped in the aircraft, the 2 of us, myself and another guy, jumped in the aircraft, went to plug our mic tel leads in, and they weren't compatible. So our plug didn't fit their socket. So took the helmets off because otherwise we wouldn't have been able to communicate, and put our woolly hats back on. Went through the whole pre-start sequence, which we thought, you know, it was pretty logical. And then I couldn't find the start button. You know, I was looking up here, I was looking down there, absolutely, you know, and there's 2 maintainers standing outside wondering what on earth's going on. And the last thing you touch in a helicopter equipped with a winch is a trigger on the collective, because usually that's the cutter for the winch. And so I've been trained over the years, never mess with that. But I thought, well, hang on a second, it hasn't got a winch. So I pulled the trigger, and that was the start button. So we got the engine running. We then did a ground run, did, you know, sort of control checks, and then thought, okay, well, let's lift into the hover. So we did, you know, hover left, right, did a circuit, and then the fuel lights came on. So we thought, okay, need to find fuel. So we saw the HMS Fearless, one of the landing ships was in the bay. So we zipped over there. Now, remember, we're complete Argentinian markings. Came alongside, gave the sort of fuel signal, and there was lots of chat on the headset. And eventually, you know, we got told, yep, come on, you know, land on. I wound the throttle down, so we got slow rotor, got out, and in came the guy with the fueling and said, right, you know, where does it go? Oh, I have absolutely no idea whatsoever. It was slightly embarrassing, but what had happened was by opening the door, we had in essence covered the refueling cap. And of course, I closed the door and there it is. So anyway, to cut a long story short, I flew about 4 hours in the aircraft. I think the squadron flew probably 20. I can't remember exactly. And unfortunately, when the first of the non-combatant administrators arrived on the island, we got told in no uncertain terms that we were not to fly it, which is probably fair, but by that stage we had got a lot out of it. We'd used it to fly our own people around to see that, you know, tasking that we couldn't do in the Sea King. And it is in a hangar in Yeovilton, attached to the Fleet Aero Museum.
Wow. I was going to ask, where did it actually end up? I thought it was going to say the bottom of the South Atlantic, but
no, it was flown onto the ship when the aircraft came back. They came back on the causeway, but it had to be trucked off when it got back to the UK. It was forbidden to fly.
Awesome. Absolutely amazing. So I'm really conscious that we're almost at time, so we're going to have to canter through the rest. But it's been heartbreaking, and it's been amazing in equal measure so far. So you come back and you think, okay, I'll tell you what I'll do now. I'll join the US Navy for a bit as a guest. Is that right? Is that a fair summary?
Well, first of all, we came back and I think we had some leave. We had our honeymoon, and then flew for probably about another 9 or 10 months with back to students, 90 knots, 1,000 feet, ball in the middle, back to circuits. And then Sally and I were sent off on exchange tour in Florida with US Navy Sea King Squadron, where I became the evaluator, the equivalent of the standards guy, and was asked then to write a combat SAR course for the US Navy, because there was a big lobby by, I guess, the ex-Vietnam War veteran seniors that the Navy didn't have that capability. So it was a great experience. We had 2 years in Jacksonville, Florida, with a lot of flying. Those of you who've not been in the military who are watching, the military has that fantastic advantage on a squadron. When you arrive onto a squadron, all of a sudden you've got 20 friends and 20 people or more who are trying to help you settle in and help you, understand how everything works. But it is a very different flying environment, very different terminology. The aircraft was slightly different. Got to fly the Waterbird and various other things that we don't do in the UK. But it was a fantastic experience.
And I found it amazing when we spoke before the show that the Americans didn't really have our combat search and rescue capability. I find that sort of amazing. That was what you were there to do. Is that a fair sort of summary?
Yeah, but the squadrons in those days were that embarked on the carriers did two things. They either did anti-submarine warfare, or they were what's known as plane guard. So probably a stripped out Sea King, and it does right-hand circuits on the ship. So if anybody ejects while landing or taking off, they're the first on the spot. So they didn't have that interdiction capability to go and pick up a pilot who had ejected over enemy territory. That's why the ex-Vietnamese, Vietnam War senior officers were all clamoring for, because it was lacking then, and they felt it was still lacking. From my point of view, I thought was missing was much more of the secondary role training. So the load lifting, the sloping ground landings, the low-level navigation, those sort of things that we taught as a standard item, they didn't teach in their curriculum. So in essence, that's what we created as a small team of us, which I think eventually they got dedicated airframes some years later, and now it's quite a serious capability, much better than the capability we've got in the UK now.
Yeah,
no, I agree. Having seen it in Afghanistan, the US Navy's SEER and combat search and rescue capability is just outstanding. But talking about getting serious and getting back to basics with a map and compass, you go back to CFS when you come back. And I've got a picture here. Again, that in my limited opinion, in my limited sort of helicopter knowledge, is probably not good.
Well, it depends on why you're doing it and whether you're supposed to be doing it. I was lucky enough to do the one of two solo Gazelle display pilots, where in essence the limits of the airplane are 90 degrees down, 90 degrees up, 90 degrees back. So you couldn't exceed the limits, but the display was designed to explore the full limits of the airframe. And in a relatively short display, I think it was 7.5 minutes, something like that. And it was great fun. It did add to the weekends from a flying point of view, which was obviously more tough on Sally. But I loved the job. I mean, the being in the instructor's instructor and being sort of almost straight out of RADA for the second half of the course, where you're playing the grumpy student or the dopey student or whatever, was just the most, I loved it. But challenging at the same time, and lots of hours. I mean, I flew about 60 hours a month in that role. So it was great. John, really enjoyed it.
I played the dumb, grumpy student both at the same time, all the time, actually. It sounded like you were having great fun. So you've done all this cool stuff. You've been to America. CFS is amazing. You're turning helicopters, at 90-degree angles that look amazing, but sounds like, as you've described it, as fun. Why did you leave?
I I was just I was in two minds of what to do, and eventually we decided that that we would we would leave and go and basically start a completely different career, make a total career change. So I went off into sales and marketing in a simulation company based in near Manchester. So
I was going to say, and we've spoken about this, but airline flying just didn't appeal. You went and even had a look, and it had a look. You know, lots of people come out the military, and it's reasonably easy to transition to do that. And how did you feel about that? Because I think our viewers would be really interested to hear.
I thought long and hard about commercial helicopter flying. My one experience of going off with Air 2000, I really didn't get on the ground thinking, yes, this is what I wanted to do. And I always felt that in aviation, unless you have that feeling, you shouldn't be doing it. You know, and therefore I think you've got to be completely excited or don't do it. And so we made Sally and I both made a very, sort of determined decision to not go down that route and go off on a completely different tack. I don't think aviation is anything you should do in less than full measures or 100% or however you want to explain it. And my heart wasn't in it. It really wasn't. So.
And I think you've absolutely demonstrated beyond any reasonable doubt that your approach to aviation is 100% or absolutely nothing. So that's brilliant. So you then get into the sort of corporate side of defence and I mean, it'd be good to just canter through those companies and your experiences. How did you take anything from the military to that role? I guess you must have done.
Yeah. I mean, I did a resettlement course on as I was about to leave, and the one thing that came out of for one of the instructors was basically, if you see an ad with 5 criteria, if you can do 3 of them, you should consider yourself, as a candidate. And there was a Sunday Times job ad in the Sunday Times job supplement, for those of us who are old enough to remember that. And in there, it had something along the lines of person with the skills of training needs analysis, instructional environment. And there were 2 others. And I thought, I could do 3 of those. So I applied and got the job. But I was also very keen to make it a conversion, if you want to know what I mean, in the sense of converting to being out of the military as a professional salesperson, not kind of relying on my mates who were now in some job in the MOD. So I had the Far East as an area initially, and somewhere I was familiar with because I had gone to school in Asia, spoke some Thai, and that was an asset, but it was a big learning curve, there's no doubt. And then I was then recruited by Westland Helicopters as international sales director, one of 4, and we had specific campaigns that we ran. And then I was recruited into Land Systems, which is a whole different world, into Vickers Defence Systems, and then Vickers sales and marketing director, and then Vickers was taken over by Rolls-Royce under acquisition. And so I was moved into the defence aerospace business as director of sales and marketing, or as head of customer business, as we would describe it, for all of our worldwide customers. So remember that Rolls-Royce owns what was Allison. I think I might have lost you. Hang on a second.
Oh, no, you're still there. We've still got you.
Oh, good. I just had a little sort of timeout. There we go. So obviously anything that was Allison, and so C-130 engines, V-22, Global Hawk, that was all part of our portfolio, as well as the ones that we would understand more regularly. So Pegasus and Harrier, the Hawk, Eurofighter as a consortium, and all the helicopters. So we had everything from Model 250s and jet rangers, all the way through up to eventually the lift system in JSF. So it was a fantastic role, really great people, and I did that up until about 11 years ago when I retired. So
in reality, then you spent more time probably in airplanes in your non-flying role than you did in your flying role. traveling around the world because I've got the Far East, a whole host of places there. What's it like to sit in the back and let it all happen? Do you ever think, oh goodness, what are these idiots up to?
I think it's only in the sense of sometimes a little knowledge is a dangerous thing, and you hear, there's an issue. A classic example: I did London, LA, and then I was straight onto the LA Auckland flight, I think it was, and we were rolling down the runway. There was an almighty bang, and brakes on, throttles back, and the pilot came up and said, ladies and gentlemen, he was very, very sorry, but they had an instrument failure. And we would taxi back in, and we'll get the engineers to take a look at it. And then he came up about 20 minutes later, said, yes, well, we've got new instrument coming, and it hopefully won't be very long. And I was just thinking, no, absolutely, that's a complete nonsense. We were obviously in a crosswind, and there was obviously, I guess there was a surge on the inboard. So I sent my business card with a, Rolls Royce on it, just saying, I hope it isn't one of ours, exclamation mark, and sent it up to the, and he took it in good sense. But it's those kind of things where, at least with a flying background, you understood a little bit more about what was going on rather than necessarily what you were being told. But I flew too much, to be fair. I mean, Australia a couple of times a year, there and back, including New Zealand in 6 days. 3 million air miles on BA and all the other airlines, and really I'd had enough of that. It was just crazy. It really was.
Enough avios to fly the missus round the world for the rest of your time, I hope.
Well, we made use of them on retirement, so that's a whole different story.
Wonderful. Well, John, I would love to talk all night, because your experience is it's enormous. But we're going to have to sort of draw it to a close at the hour-and-a-half point, which is, like we always say, this is an hour long. It never is. I think we've done one show that's an hour. There we are. But we've got 3 questions that we're going to have to ask between 2 of us. So I think I'll start. And we ask them to every one of our guests. Looking back at your career, out of all of it, right across the corporate thing and back into the Navy, what's the bit you're most proud of, do you think?
I was asked this not long ago by a really good friend of mine, and my reply then and would be now is my family, because at the end of the day, with all this travel is all fantastic and all fine and good, but if you're heading off in the jet to go off to meet customers in whatever, and your family is back in the UK without you. I mean, one year I worked for Westlands, I was away for more or less 10.5 months of the year, and that was when you added it all up, because they had a policy of not having offices in the places we were running campaigns. So you're on the complete beck and call of the customer. And yet all through that, I've got, 2 fantastic boys, a wonderful wife who kept it all glued together. And I think as a team, that would be my item. That would be what I'm most proud of, is the way that all of that happened. And every decision that we took was done collectively.
That's a wonderful answer. Scottie. Next question.
John, looking back, what advice would you give your 10-year-old self, knowing what you know now?
I think go with what you have a passion for, not what you think you ought to do. And I was going to go to university, and my heart wasn't in it. It goes back to maybe to my commercial, flying sort of point of view. And I saw an ad in the Daily Mail. I did read it in those days, which was a wasp in 4 pictures approaching a flight deck, and it was, I'm gonna be a pilot in the Navy. And my parents were overseas. I was living on my own in London. Went to the interviews, got accepted, and phoned them, told them that I wasn't going to university. Slight pause on the other end, slight silent moment, but I had already applied and been accepted to join the Navy, and I was starting on January the 3rd. And I think from then on, I've always felt that whatever you do, you put 100% of you into it. it doesn't matter whether when I finished my A levels to go into Dartmouth, I stacked books at Foyle's bookshop in Tottenham Court Road. But I would tell my 10-year-old self, go with your passions and then do everything to the full capability that you have. Never feel like you didn't quite do it as well as you could.
Well, that's
brilliant answer, John. As Mark said earlier, all or nothing.
Yeah, all or nothing.
And so with that in mind, then, what do the next 5 years hold for you, John?
I don't know. We were obviously hoping that by this stage we'd, having been off on a trip when we first retired, to do a bit more traveling. So that will be the objective, to actually do a bit more as holiday makers rather than sitting in the front and not seeing the places that I visited, arriving at 6 a.m, full day, get on the plane at night, and when you got back to the office, people would say, "Oh, where have you been?" And say, "Oh, well, I've been to Australia, New Zealand, blah, 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 blah." And they say, "Aren't you lucky?" And you think,
No.
So we're looking forward to doing some of that in our leisure.
Yeah, wonderful. One Marriott looks quite a lot like another Marriott, doesn't it, really? Yeah. Room service menus very often the same. Well, John Boughton, thank you very much for being so generous with your time, being on the show this evening. It's been absolutely amazing. And again, I said before that we don't say it enough, but thank you for your service. It's an incredible thing that all of our armed forces do, all of the people who are involved in those sorts of efforts do on our behalf. So thanks for being here this evening. Thanks for everything.
Thank you.
And John, maybe we'll have you back on another show in the future. You can tell us about sailing across the Atlantic.
No more boats. No more boats.
Sorry, there you go.
That's not happening. I'll handle the special boat edition of the Layover. No, it's not happening. Thank you for your time. I've loved it, but we're not having you back to talk about boats. If you come back, it's helicopters. Okay. I'm happy with that, but not boats.
Oh,
John,
you hear that?
Good night.
Thanks, John.
Thanks.
Wow.
Ooh, I don't know what happened there. It was in and out. Oh,
he was in and
mate,
out.
It's big. We're in big trouble. You know that.
Well, we've pressed all the wrong buttons. But wasn't that fantastic? Wasn't that fantastic?
It was absolutely amazing. Really, really fun. And I saw this straight away. The boys are back and no moderator. It couldn't be any more true that we'd lost the moderator this evening. No, it was brilliant. I genuinely such a humble man. Really, really brilliant show tonight.
Awesome self-awareness as well. I think that's very often missing. I think you and I have probably worked with people who their heart's not in it anymore, but they can't give up. And that's an incredible moment to reach in your life. You say, no, that's enough of that for me. Thanks very much. No matter how good, how illustrious, how fantastic that career's been. Yeah. That has been another awesome episode. No thanks to us.
Before we go, I was just about to hit the outro then and just call it quits. But actually, we have to tell everyone that next week, there is no live show next week because we're all flying. There will be a show at 7:00. It'll be some recorded snippets of nonsense from the three of us. Trying something different next week. If you don't like it, you don't like it. We don't care. But don't press the thumbs down thing because then YouTube doesn't like us. If you don't like it, just don't do anything. If you loved it and you're watching on Catchback, don't forget, thumbs up helps us with the YouTube algorithm. And you will have seen that there are adverts on our stuff, which means that YouTube does pay us if you do watch the adverts. So if you don't skip them, it means that we'll be able to afford to do some cool stuff, probably in around about 2027, looking at how much we've made thus far. No, I'm joking aside. We didn't even make enough for a coffee over the last month. It was £1.47. And that's not a word of a lie. But if you love the show, please do subscribe, and a thumbs up helps us.
Thanks,
on behalf
everyone.
of me, Mark,
And me,
and Lindsay, somewhere over the Atlantic. Bye, everyone.
good night.